Grüß, willkommen in einem aufregendes video. Welcome to yet another exciting video, in this case episode 6 of my Battles series of videos. This video will cover the Battle of Ephesus, which was a battle fought between the Persians and the Greeks in 498 BC. This video is mainly focused on looking at the battle from a figure gaming point of view, which includes the order of battle, troop types, and the estimated flow of the battle. If you wish a big picture of why the battle was fought, then this may not be the video for you, but if you want to know about the troop types, force mixes, and what actually occurred on the battlefield, then continue to view on. Trying to make sense of this battle is a real shot in the dark. Our sources are some paragraph from Herodotus, which provides minimal useful information. As a result, most of this is based on guesswork. Prepare your salt. I'll first cover the order of the battle and troop types of the Greek army. The army consisted of a small detachment from Athens and Eretria, 20 triremes from Athens and 5 from Eretria. Each trireme consisted of 170 rowers and 20 crew and marines. This gives us a maximum total of 4,000 Athenians and 1,000 Eritreans. However, how many of these men accompanied the army and how they were equipped is a little bit unknown. The bulk of the army were Milesians, with some support from other cities. Specifically mentioned is Ephesus. As Miletus was considered the greatest and largest of all Ionian cities before Persian rule, we could assume it was able to raise a similar number of troops as, let's say, Athens, which would have been about 10,000 men, or hoplites perhaps. The only gaming scenario I could find concerning this battle was command and colour, shown here. As this is about the only force mix source I possess, I'll attempt to convert this into a more detailed and useful force mix. If we assume Miletus could raise a force of 10,000 men and was supported by a number of other smaller Ionian cities, which maybe could supply 1,000 men each, that's possibly our starting point. We know the name of one city, Ephesus, but are uncertain of the others. Athens and Eretria supplied a small number of men as well. Assuming that each counter in command and colour represents 1,000 men, we will assume a force of 11,000 men. This shows a possible force mix. It's possible the force was much larger, as marching on a major Persian city would require maybe more than 11,000 men. Another likely scenario is the force consisted of closer to 20,000 men, with a larger number of skirmishers and light troop, as well as more hoplites. I would have expected Miletus was able to raise at least 10,000 hoplites, with several thousand more from other Ionian cities. However, I have no evidence of this, and as a result I'll stay with the command and colour force mix, which has a total of 11,000 Greeks. Let's now look at the troop types through the prism of the DBMM version 2 troop type classification. Some of the hoplites, such as from Athens and regular guards from Ionia, would be considered as reasonably good quality. We are assuming the Greek army consisted of 1,000 of these troop types. If the Ionians had a large number of good quality hoplites, you would expect the Persians to suffer the same fate as they did at Marathon, perhaps. When we move to the skirmish troops, we're assuming the Ionians possessed approximately 1,000 archers or perhaps slingers. Also staying with skirmish troops, we can assume the Ionians probably possessed about 2,000 javelin. According to the DBMM version 2.1 army list, the Ionians would field cavalry rather than light horse. If we assume there are 1,000 of these troop types, that's probably about the most that I would expect. The bulk of the Ionian foot would be inferior hoplites. When I say inferior, that's the DBMM classification, not, saying that they're somewhat inferior troops. As pelters do not seem to be an option according to DBMM 2.1, the Ionian army would consist of 6,000 hoplites of this particular troop type. This actually seems reasonable, considering the result of the battle. Now it's time to cover the Persian army. We can make a few guesses. The original army at Sardis was clearly inferior to the Ionian army, which is why it did not sally out. When it was joined by the relief army, it was not larger than the Ionian army, but was still able to defeat it, although this was probably not a crushing defeat. If I go back to my command and colour force mix and assume each counter once again represents 1,000 men, the Persian army would consist of 15,000 men. As the Persians did win the battle, this does seem very reasonable, although I'm uncertain about the heavy chariots. If the commander were with the chariots, then DBMM 2.1 could accommodate this, although the numbers would be much lower, perhaps no more than 100 chariots, and any shortfall would be converted into medium cavalry. Based on the Command and Colour board game and DBMM version 2.1 army list, this is my estimate of the Persian force. A few points about the troop types. CNC, or Command and Colour, has the Persians with 5 units, or perhaps 5,000 light cavalry. If we look at DBMM version 2.1 army list, we quickly find the Persians don't have a large range of light horse available. Up to 8 elements of horse archers, 2 elements of Sargadian lasso men, and 2 elements of Bedouins on horses, which totals about 2,400 cavalry. The Persians can field a much larger cavalry force, up to 12 elements, totaling 2,400 cavalry, but these are not light horse. While this army probably represents the infantry and cavalry present at Sardis and reinforcement cavalry from a central force, so you could argue the cavalry came from maybe 2 armies, and as a result, the DBMM cavalry ratios don't match the real-life army that existed here. I would field 5,000 medium cavalry and at the most 2,500 skirmish bow-armed cavalry. Now, DBMM could be wrong, but while it may be considered far from a primary source, it's all I have, and it's probably more correct than wrong, and it's certainly more researched or better researched than Command and Colour. So this is what I'm going for, and this is my rationalisation for it. Let's now look at the possible troop types involved in the battle, once again using our DBMM troop type prism. The Persians had, at least I feel they had, 2,500 medium and 5,000 light cavalry, which was probably standard Persian medium cavalry. Starting with the chariots, the Persians had 3 commanders, so it's possible each had a personal bodyguard of 2 horse chariots, which could total 150 chariots and are perhaps 300 to 500 men. The bulk of the light foot were probably standard Persian infantry, which by Greek standards would be considered as light. These probably comprised about 4,000 men in total. Most of the light cavalry could have consisted of horse archers, which had to be present as these appeared represented the main light horse of the Persian army at the time. Some of the light cavalry may have consisted of this rather unusual troop type, Sargatian lasso men, which I find a very unusual troop type. I expect that they may have had also a javelin. According to my estimates, the Persians possessed 2,000 light archers. It's also possible these may have been close-order bowmen and were found with the Persian foot. Personally, I suspect the latter was probably the more accurate description of what these troop types actually represented. My estimates show the Persians possessed 2,000 javelin. They may have also contained some bow-armed skirmishers as well. If Libyan troops were available, some of the javelin may have been Libyan. I personally doubt any Libyan troops were present, as these troops came from a location far away, and this battle was fought with troops on hand. The Persian counterattack may well have involved some possible Libyan troops. It's hard to say. If the Libyans were present, then perhaps the chariots were Libyan. This shows the path of the Ionian forces and the location of the battle. Some scholars felt the Persian force consisted of pure cavalry, which is why it caught up with the Ionians. I personally feel this is simplistic because over this distance, cavalry would not give you that much of a speed advantage alone. The more likely cause was the Greeks were loaded down with booty from Sardis, and as a result marched very slowly. The Persians were simply lighter. This map, which is from Google Earth, shows the valley which the Greeks would have travelled down after burning Sardis. As the battle is called the Battle of Ephesus, I have to assume it was close to Ephesus, which is about where the Ephesus Stadium is located today. It's likely the battle occurred somewhere in the box shown here on the left. The gap here was about 1 kilometre, so it was lucky the Greeks were not caught earlier where the gap was much larger and the Persian cavalry would have had a field day. Incidentally, I have had one of my viewers made a comment that the Ephesus Stadium shown here is not exactly the correct location and it could be somewhere else. But anyway, I'm just going with where I think Ephesus is and where the battle goes based on my preliminary research. This is the battlefield according to the Command and Colour board game, basically a flat wide plain. While in principle this was probably correct, the Greeks were not eliminated, thus they would have had some cavalry unfriendly terrain on each flank and behind the Greeks. Saying that, it's likely the battlefield was at least 2,500 metres wide, which could not be covered by only 11,000 men, thus there were gaps for the Persian cavalry to get through. I have no idea where the exact location of the battle occurred. I'm going to guess it was in front of the town of Ephesus. I'm assuming the Greeks formed up on the south side of the river, as this would have been on the main road. There, the line would be about 1,000 metres long. That's the battle line. However, at that point, it looks like the river on the left flank was not that wide or deep, perhaps 25 metres wide and a few metres deep, allowing the Persians to outflank the Greeks, which may have been the main reason the Greeks lost. This could also explain why there were Athenian survivors, as these may have managed to cross the rough terrain on their right flank in order to escape. A possible sequence of the battle could look as follows. The retreating Ionians sight the Persian army in pursuit, perhaps in the morning, and they were too far away from the city to reach it. The Ionians managed to form up their line before the bulk of the Persians arrived. This would support the theory the Greeks consisted of about 10,000 foot, as these would have been able to cover 750 metres, 8 ranks deep, and if they stretch out a bit, they could have covered the entire the full 1,000 metres with a cavalry and some light foot in reserve on the left flank to counter any outflanking attempt by the Persians. Other scholars claim the Greeks were at a major disadvantage because they were tired. I would suggest if this was correct, the Persians were in a worse position as they needed to move quicker and should have been even more tired. The only disadvantage the Greeks possessed was a heavy baggage train and the surprise of being caught, in my opinion anyway. After forming up, the Persian main line now pins the Greek front line, with a strong cavalry force advancing over the river and around the flank. The Persian flanking attack crosses the 20-metre wide river, possibly, and threatens the Greek rear. Perhaps the Greeks sent some forces to counter the Persian, most likely their cavalry, which were quickly overwhelmed. The Persians then hit the Greeks in the rear, causing its left flank to collapse. The Greeks could have attempted to attack the Persian front line, but the Persians simply withdrew. Once the Greeks are attacked in the rear, the Persians would then come back and close. So the superiority of the hoplite, while real, could have been nullified by the Persians simply by withdrawing forward and then moving back again when the hoplites returned to their line. The Greek right flank could have escaped over the rough terrain, which would be difficult for the horses, leaving the Greek left flank to be destroyed. The Persians would have also captured the army baggage and any loot the Greeks took at Sardis, as well as any supplies. This is possibly the Persian objective, and the reason why the Greeks did not simply retire to the right terrain and make their way to Ephesus over the rough ground. They needed to defend their baggage and supplies. However, look, a quick caveat, I have no idea if this is what happened, but considering the Greeks were mainly foot, but heavier than the Persians, and the Persians probably had enough room to outflank the Greeks, this scenario seems reasonable. The Athenians at Marathon were very cautious of the Persian cavalry and of being outflanked. Perhaps this battle was the cause of their caution, and it was a good thing that they were cautious at Marathon. And so this completes episode 6 of my military history video series, battle series, covering a rather significant battle. Even if not very interesting, I would suggest this may be an easy battle to create a scenario for. I may even try doing one for DBMM or DBM to see how it plays. Incidentally, I did actually refight this using P17CW, which is basically a figure game version of the SPI pre-stag board game, and it did play out pretty much as my scenario indicated here, using another opponent. I played the Greeks, and my opponent basically repeated the strategy I had in this video. I don't think he ever watched the video, so he didn't get any hints from it. So I think it's probably a logical strategy. Alle guten Dingen kommen zu einem Ende.